Hi, it's Marty Braden again. Curiosity for just another animal or of infinite worth seems to have caught your attention. I'm so excited to have you share a little time with me. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, let me quickly explain what my channel is about. I think it'll help you enjoy it more fully if you understand the why behind the topics I cover. First of all, please keep in mind that I don't have a staff of technicians to do all sorts of fancy high-techy production stuff around my content, but I think you'll enjoy it nonetheless. It's quite informative. If you don't know much about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is often referred to as the Mormons or the Mormon Church, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I get all of my topics from my book I recently published titled An Atheist Delusion. It's my Latter-day Saint perspective on Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. As you know, Richard's an atheist and an evolutionary biologist who absolutely hates religion of any kind. In fact, he said that his purpose for writing this book was to make atheists out of all of us. Anyway, after I published An Atheist Delusion, I decided to set up this YouTube channel and record and post short videos of me reviewing every single anti-God argument Dawkins puts forth in his book. And so far I've posted 112 videos in my series, and the video you're watching now is part 113 in that series. So I'm going to pick it up where I left off last time. And that subtitle was called The Great Beethoven Fallacy. Richard introduces what he calls the potential argument made by anti-abortionists. He says that they argue that abortion has deprived it, the fetus, of the opportunity of a full human life in the future. End quote. Then Richard reveals his own feeling about abortion when he says, quote, the notion is epitomized by a rhetorical argument whose extreme stupidity is its only defense against a charge of serious dishonesty, end quote. Next, Richard uses a hypothetical dialogue between doctors in order to introduce what he called the Beethoven fallacy. Richard says, quote, about the terminating of pregnancy, I want your opinion. The father was syphilitic, the mother tuberculosis. Of the 4 children born, the first was blind, the second died, and the third was deaf and dumb. The fourth was also tuberculous. What would you have done? I would have terminated the pregnancy, he said. Then you would have murdered Beethoven. Richard explains the apparently a certain professor, L.R. Agnew at UCLA Medical School, was said to have which is said to have been the source of this hypothetical, and I quote Richard as saying, it is a ridiculous story. Professor Agnew apparently put this dilemma to his students and told them, congratulations, you have just murdered Beethoven. Richard goes on to say that invented it certainly was. It is completely false. It is in fact a full-fledged urban legend, a fabrication deliberately disseminated by people with a vested interest in spreading it. Then Richard concludes by saying, but the fact that it is a lie is, in any case, completely besides the point, he says. Even if it were not a lie, the argument derived from it is a very bad argument indeed, end quote. Without going any further, let me remind you of the argument made by Richard regarding the great Beethoven fallacy, wherein he said it was a typical example of the kind of logical mess we get into when our minds are befuddled by religiously inspired absolutism. I would change that a little bit. I would say, he's describing it pretty well here, a typical example of the kind of logical mess we get into when our minds are what? When our minds only are left to subjective ideas, subjective feelings, and what they call truth and not objective truth. With subjectivity, everybody's opinion matters. Everybody's opinion is their own truth. Everybody's logic creates a spiraling down mess of chaos. He calls it a befuddled by religiously inspired absolutism. That's only one little strain that it could possibly cause such, but all subjective of approach to truth leads to absolute chaos. So in that sense, it is an absolutist situation. Anyhow, Richard's statement here is an example of how a society, having only a subjective standard to which they adhere, almost certainly leads them into a logical, befuddled mess. Whereas if you have an objective standard, as I said, to which you adhere, such truth removes all doubt and confusion on the matter. Richard's arguments are often ridiculous as they are meant to raise eyebrows, for sure. An example of such a ridiculous argument is the argument Richard made against the loss of the human potential which resides within every human being. Richard is saying that pro-lifers like me, like myself, are saying no matter the method of depriving said human beings from coming into existence, it is tantamount to murder. no matter the method. Interesting. Listen to what he says. Richard then tries to make the case that Beethoven's story is a fallacy by using a twisted attack on the sacred procreative power our Creator has given to all of us, the power to bring about human life. Richard's so-called logic seems to be saying that the pro-life proponents valuing human potential is invalid and a fallacy if it doesn't include the idea that just the potential power a person has for creating life, the opportunity of having sex, in other words, Richard's talking about, if not seized upon immediately, if we fail to have sex at every given opportunity that presents itself, in other words, this too is tantamount to murder. This is so ridiculous. I would think he's smart in this, but this, let me see, he continues on. This kind of laughable, sick logic, especially coming from someone who holds himself up as having an eminent intellect and the highest powers of logic in the world, in my mind is evidence that Richard is suffering from an atheist delusion. No one that I have ever discussed this difficult subject with has ever posited the argument that, like abortion, even the very opportunity of having sex, no matter when it is presented, if not acted on right then and there, is a case for murder, because a life could be made, and that's life's potential could bless the world. And if you don't seize upon that opportunity immediately, then you're a murderer too. That's Richard's philosophy here. It's just, I think it's ridiculous, and I hope he's just being facetious. But he says, Richard must be kidding. I feel Richard could have imagined a far better argument than using this outrageous and, dare I say, dim-witted argument to make his point. My goodness, Richard, come on, man. Don't you have any dignity or refinement in you? I kind of got away from it. I apologize that. I want to be kindly. I don't want to be contentious. But good grief. Using Richard's so-called logic is like a man saying to any woman he comes across, hey, I have an uncontrollable urge to have sex, and if you don't help me satisfy it, you will be an accomplice to murder. The death of the potential baby that could be born from having sex with me and the death of its potential as a person will be on your head. Wow, that's what I call a pickup line. Good honk in the morning. To this I can only say, quoting the famous philosopher Charlie Brown, good grief. Richard goes on to make a statement that I find quite arrogant. He says, the granting of uniquely special rights to cells of the species Homo sapiens, in other words, it's just an animal in his mind, is hard to reconcile with the fact of evolution. Admittedly, this will not worry those many anti-abortionists who don't understand that evolution is a fact. End quote. Evolution is a fact? There it is. Richard saying evolution is a fact over and over and over again ad infinitum is so credulous to me. Saying it often doesn't make it a fact, Richard. As I've said countless times in my book so far, the jury on the case for evolution is still out, and it will stay out until it's incontrovertibly falsified or incontrovertibly proven as a theory, and that day is when this theory will be falsified, I believe, and it's fast approaching. The last argument Richard makes against anti-abortionists is evolution itself. Richard says, quote, the evolution point is very simple. The humanness of an embryo's cells cannot confer upon it any absolutely discontinuous moral status. End quote. As I've said, Richard sees humans as just animals with no divinity in us, meaning they're disposable, just like any dog that we get overpopulated or cats or whatever. They're all disposable, including human beings for those who are godless. The Lord said, however, that we are made in his divine image. The Lord said we're made in his divine image and that we are of infinite worth. That's the little thumbnail. Human, are they just animals, or are we all of infinite worth? Richard continues, the gradual continuity that is an inescapable feature of biological evolution tells us that there must be some intermediate who would lie sufficiently close to the borderline to blur the moral principle and destroy its absoluteness. A better way to say this is that there are no natural borderlines in evolution. The illusion, here it comes, the illusion of a borderline is created by the fact that the evolutionary intermediates happen to be extinct. How convenient is that, Richard? Why is it that Richard seems to always cry, it's an illusion, whenever evidence is discovered that brings us closer and closer to disproving evolution? Could it possibly be because of the fact that evolution isn't at all what it's cracked up to be? In other words, in order for evolution to be a fact, like Richard claims it is, there must be intermediates existing in our world today. But Richard just admits that there aren't any, and that's because they're all extinct. An interesting choice of words, don't you think? Extinct? Really? Try, there never were any intermediates to begin with, Richard, and that's because everything was created as finished creations at their activation, at their fertilization, at their very beginnings. God being their creator, God being the incredible intelligent mind that placed all the information into these two life creating cells of the mother and the father, and it's all contained and it directed it to a perfect growth. Now, in mortality, he can have some problems and disease and little faux pas here and there that causes issues. But the sense of the fact that they're there in those two seeds that come together to create life, all the information, God is their creator. Richard truly has brought into Satan's Antichrist dogma hook, line, and sinker, and his full and complete conversion to it is why I feel comfortable saying that Richard has an atheist delusion when it comes to its godless tenet of natural selection. It has colored, or should I say, it has distorted everything else he believes in, including his belief about God's non-existence. This can also be said about me, of course, and other atheists like me. I too have a full and complete conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ, including God's plan and its tenets of redemption and eternal happiness. They having been restored by the instrumentality of the prophet Joseph Smith, who God raised up in the early 19th century to be his oracle of truth. And so by Richard's interpretation of the definition of delusion and delusional, one can say that it's a good description of me too. I'll grant that. The fact is, either I am delusional or Richard is delusional. There is no middle ground where we both can be right. Is there? Is there a middle ground? It's one or the other. You, my readers, must decide for yourselves which of us is delusional. And for you who are watching, you need to decide which of us is delusional. Have you been doing the reference legs of evidence? And which of us is of sound mind? Either God exists or he doesn't. Either God exists or he doesn't. Let me ask you, at this juncture of my book and of the videos I've been doing about my book, how far has your belief cursor moved along the percentage of probability spectrum regarding the existence of God? Has it moved towards or away from God's existence, or towards or away from God does not exist? Hopefully, you've been keeping track of each reference leg of evidence, whether you agree with them or not, keeping track of them, and I've provided a lot so far. And so in an effort to help you decide whether or not your personal table of belief stand is becoming more anchored or immovable, that list should help. Or has it become more unstable? Has your table become more unstable and more cognitive dissonance has increased, and now you're moving yourself into a faith crisis that there is no God? Where are you? Have you been keeping track of each one and weighing it as a true, honest truth seeker? Anyhow, I'll just say this idea that we're animals that just popped out of the chemical soup and evolved over millions of years from a blip to a burp to a frog to a whatever, and all of a sudden new information came in and infused and we became and sprung wings and all those kind of things that natural selection says it has and causes, upon which when there's life, not before life, but where that's life, that's what's made all this happen. Now all that information's coming in. And so I ask you, though, to consider this on this natural selection animal belief system that Richard has. Does the growth of those two seeds that start and begin life to become a bird, with an exotic bird, and maybe that parrots with all that beautiful color and the capacity to even talk and those kind of things, and then monkeys and apes and whales and elephants and giraffes, do those seeds all of a sudden have the when they were in there? Where did that new information come from? Where did that information that directed it to all of a sudden as a lizard spring upward and have wings? Where's that new information come? Because every cell, every protein, everything that is of that tiny molecular cellular level had to have information in their DNA. And most of that DNA doesn't say, I want you to start as a frog and then move into a lizard and then move into a running lizard with hands, and then all of a sudden those hands spring and spread out wings, and then those wings fly. I mean, where's that information come? No matter has ever produced new information not related to whether to do a whole new kind manifestation. Surely species with birds and their little beaks change within their environment. That's just part of the species process that truly is the information in there. But to go from one thing to a completely different um, um, kind with these kind of features that require absolute new incredible information, there's no proof that matter has ever produced that kind of spontaneous information to direct its cells like the DNA does with normal, because all of them were perfect in their beginnings, and then the fall happened. So all that was there, all the information was there. And so I ask you again, is it just an animal that's disposable? Are we just animals that are disposable? Or are we truly of infinite worth because we're truly his spirit sons and daughters here to have a spiritual and mortal experience combined, and then ultimately receive our eternal bodies through the resurrection, which is the major gift that he's extended to us. Interesting. That's why he says he created us after his own image and likeness. We are like him. We are meant, as the little acorn uh, um, is meant to become an oak. We're meant to become an oak as a human being, intelligent, bright children of God. Anyhow, those are my thoughts. That's some of my perspectives. Share what your thoughts are. Ask any question you have of me. I'd love to answer them as best and as soon as I can get to it. Be patient, but I think I get to it pretty quick. But until next time, I sincerely do want to wish you continued success. Goodbye.